Okay, so Father Ripker, I'm wondering if you see a parallel because you know there's nothing new under the sun. In past talks, you've mentioned one of the tactics that evolutionary minded scientists, when they're lacking data for their hypothesis, they'll say, well, if given enough time, eventually this could happen. But as you've said, the upper echelon knows that this is not true, but maybe consider it a useful subterfuge. Do you see a parallel with a similar tactic being used today by scientists claiming that aliens could be the reason for things that are of a supernatural origin? Like, for example, the tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe, rather than explaining it by supernatural, because they know that there's no natural explanation for it, they'll say, well, it might be aliens that did it. I've actually heard that a number of times. Or natural or preternatural origin for things such as UAPs and UFOs. They don't want an explanation that's preternatural for UFOs, but want it to be natural. So they want
Right.
it to be, something that's coming from the universe, other people, aliens, what have you.
Yeah, that in my own particular um, domain, which is philosophy, because that's what my doctorate is actually in. If you pay close attention to what they're proposing, is it actually violates one first principle and therefore falls subject to one informal fallacy. And so the basic principle that it violates is the principle of evidence. So the principle of evidence has a variety of different ways in which it's expressed. And basically, it says that the degree of certitude is based upon the degree of the certitude of the evidence. So if evidence A, B, and C do not propose or give you certitude about the conclusion Y, then you can't say that A, B, and C are sufficient explanations for Y. You have to say, well, these are part of it. They may be part of it. There could be something to that, or what have you. Now, in relationship to the principle of evidence, also says that if there's a single, there's two parts of it. If there's a single piece of evidence contrary to your hypothesis, then your hypothesis or theory is either in part or in whole false. So, and this is something in which we actually see in relationship to this particular hypothesis, because, for example, the tilma or these other supernatural events, the fact of the matter is that there were certain things that were present that would not be necessarily explained or that are beyond the capacity of even on a natural level for these things to actually have occurred. So for example, the tilma is one of those things where he simply gathered roses in his in the tilma, and then when you open it up, there's this perfectly formed. It's not even a painting; it's a form an image on there, which is not something that can be naturally caused. It's kind of the same thing in relationship to the Shroud of Turin or something like that. That there is the circumstances under which they say, well, it would require this, that, or the other thing, or that maybe aliens came and made the thing, or caused Christ to rise, or whatever. This is simply not sustainable because of the fact that there's other contrary evidence. But the primary problem with the principle of evidence is that you can't assert what is not already that isn't somehow in the evidence. There is no evidence of this. This is purely a theory. It's a theory that, well, maybe it was aliens who caused this. Maybe they came and maybe they did this. Okay. The problem is there's no evidence for this. They keep talking about it, but there's actually no evidence for these particular things to happen. This means it falls prey to a particular informal fallacy, which basically states that what is ever gratuitously asserted can be gratuitously denied. In other words, if you gratuitously assert something or speculate something of which there is no evidence for it, then without any contramanding evidence, I can deny that particular proposition. So the fact that they say, well, maybe it was aliens, I can say, well, maybe it wasn't. And then at that stage, the argument deadpans or it stops because there's no evidence on their side to continue advancing their things. And therefore, I don't have to provide any evidence. I don't have to provide any alternative explanation for it either. I don't have to argue that it's anything other than supernatural. I don't have to argue that demons couldn't cause it or that there could be the show that other natural causes couldn't be the cause. I don't have to provide that because they haven't provided sufficient evidence on their side.
So how then is it used? Do you see it in your line of work being used for the UAPs now and the UFOs, otherwise known as UFOs, um, being given a natural origin of aliens rather than the preternatural origin, which they likely are?
Yeah, and actually, there's a third possibility. So basically, when you're talking about UOs or UAPs, basically there's three possible explanations. There are three, I should say. There are three logical explanations. There are only two possible explanations. The first is that the logical explanation would be it's a logical possibility that there are aliens that are actually visiting things. That's a logical possibility. It's not a real possibility it doesn't constitute something that is plausible because of a variety of different scientific, theological, and philosophical reasons. The other two explanations are that it's diabolic, which is demons can cause these types of occurrences to where people think they see certain things, or that they actually see certain things, or they can imagine certain things and they don't know the difference between those. I'm going to talk about that in the conference, that there's the distinctions between an actual vision and an imaginative vision, and that demons can actually cause these specific things. So demons can play tricks on people, they can affect people's senses, etc. I don't think those would constitute even a majority of what we would call UFOs. The other plausible explanation, which is probably the more possible explanation, or the explanation that would probably have the most evidence for it, is that these are simply human activities or governmental experiments that could be certain forms of technology that have been developed, of which they don't want the general public to know. And as a result of that, because these things are possible on a scientific level, they may have already been discovered and may have been used. And there's some evidence to indicate that, maybe not enough, but that would be also one of the possible explanations. So you don't have to resort to the idea that aliens exist to account for UFOs. Those can be accounted for by other things, and it means very simply that because we already know the two possible causes of diabolic are also human or natural, then it would be contrary to the principle of economy to posit yet another different kind of a cause which doesn't have sufficient evidence.